What would you have said if someone told you 1 year ago, as we were last beginning the season of Lent, that all of us globally would be entering into one of the most profound wilderness experiences of the last century? Can you even remember those before times a year ago? Before perhaps you had ever worn a mask, sewn a mask, used Zoom, heard the term pandemic fatigue? Last year, as the pandemic emerged, at least for us in the US, during the season of Lent. Lent is a season of simplicity, silence, self-reflection, and sometimes sacrifice. And last year, we talked a lot about how the pandemic was resonating and even magnifying those aspects of Lent. Many of us felt like Lent was being imposed on us all, whether we wanted it or not. And in some ways, to me at least, it feels like this has been a whole year of Lent. Sure, we had Easter and Pentecost, Advent and Christmas. We tried, and yes, there were some good and beautiful moments to be sure. But to me at least, it has felt like all of those seasons have been muted by this pandemic, stifled and subdued from their usual splendor. And so as we enter into Lent once again, I must say I do feel a bit of solace. Finally, one season the pandemic won't get in the way of. One season I might actually understand better than I did a year ago. I have certainly gained more practice with silence and a more simplistic schedule. Not to mention remembering my own mortality. The phrase we began Lent with on Ash Wednesday, "Remember you are dust, and to dust you shall return," has echoed all too loudly throughout this year. Lent is also spoken of as a journey through the wilderness. In Lent, we remember the 40 days Jesus spent in the wilderness, echoing the 40 years spent in the wilderness by the Israelites centuries before. And too, what a journey for us these past 40 weeks of pandemic have been. Our Lent series this year is called Wisdom from the Wilderness. Yes, we are still in the wilderness, but we may also be at a point where we can start to glean some wisdom from it. One thing, at the very least, we can say is we are still here. Day by day, by some miracle, small or perhaps great, we have gotten through. It's really common that people want to find parallels for this pandemic, past experiences that can shed some light on what we're experiencing now. We want to make sense of what we're living through, but I think also we want to find some hope that just as people have gotten through hard times in the past, we too might make it through ourselves. Personally, I find the story of the manna from heaven, one of the stories that comes from those 40 years that the Israelites spent in the wilderness, to be deeply hopeful. The Israelites were afraid for their survival. They had no idea how they were going to find the basic things they needed, like food. And yet, day by day, they got through. God gave them what they needed in the form of manna, a special bread that fell from the sky. But they couldn't store it up for the next day. They had to trust God that it would come again, and it did. Psychologists and today's spiritual leaders alike extol the value of taking things day by day, especially when things are hard. We often hear about living in the present, being in the present, not getting too ahead of ourselves, worrying about the future, or behind ourselves, dwelling on the past. We are told to focus on what is going on around us, the sensations and experiences of the present moment, rather than the mental chatter which can draw us out of the present and into analysis and speculation. I wonder if the manna was God's gift to help keep the Israelites rooted in the present and in the physicality of eating. When I think of my own experiences of living day by day in challenging and uncertain times, I think one of my most vivid memories is of working as a counselor at summer camp. Mine was a relatively small camp with a small budget, so we all had to pitch in wherever was needed, and assignments changed frequently and often without warning. My very first summer on staff, I was 16 and a bit of a perfectionist who didn't really like to admit to not knowing how to do things. So needless to say, I was pretty stressed. Many of the things I was asked to do that summer I had never done before. Treat a broken leg. Use a power drill. Search the woods at night for a camper gone missing. Comfort a homesick girl who just couldn't sleep night after night after night. And then, after all that, came the end of summer camp teardown, after all the campers had gone home. And for us as staff, there was a completely new set of tasks. The camp directors tried to make this fun, though, for us by placing descriptions of all the tasks that needed to be done on papers taped to the wall, but with the descriptions of the jobs facing in towards the wall and just the number of people needed for the task on the side that was facing out that we could see. So, and surprisingly, this all did become fun. My colleagues, at this point close friends, and I would look around, we'd make a small group, and we'd tear down one of those papers with the number of people that matched our group size. And then we'd read that description. Who knew what it was going to say? But somehow we always figured out how to do the task, no matter how tricky or strange or maybe new to all of us. And then we would race back to the wall and find another. One night, I remember laying in my sleeping bag and having this newfound sense of confidence come over me. Somehow, day by day and task by task, I realized I was getting through. I realized I was no longer quite so fearful about the next day or the next task. And then that confidence spilled over into the rest of my life and into the fall as I drew strength from that summer and the so many new and challenging and varied tasks I had figured out how to do. Day by day and together with others, I realized I'd gotten through. Now, I'm not sure if that resonates with you directly, but I think we can all look back on the year, whether it was just a little inconvenient and stressful, or for you, perhaps one of the absolute hardest years of your life, and at least draw some strength from all that we have individually and collectively gotten through. Perhaps you, like me, realize that you are stronger or braver or resilient than you knew last year at this time. The specific Exodus story we heard today, that of manna in the wilderness, tells us about the day-by-day living that the Israelites experienced for 40 whole years. Of course, they didn't know it would be 40 years. Perhaps, like us at first, they thought it wouldn't be that long. Remember when we thought that it was just maybe 3 weeks of shelter in place and all this would be over? But later, the Israelites, somewhat like us, they started to wonder when or if their journey would end, or what the end would be like if there would be an end. They just had to live day by day. That was all they knew for sure. And I think the manna aspect of the journey really underscores that day by day living. God gave the people the food they needed, this thing called manna that fell from the sky day by day. They were given just what they needed to go on, no more and no less. And they couldn't store it up for the next day just in case God forgot or God's mind was changed. But they also couldn't take less because it was their only option and essential for survival. So there they were, having just to trust God that each morning it would be there for them and it would be enough. But the manna, you may remember, was not quite a 7-day-a-week affair. in giving them double the manna on the sixth day, so they, and I suppose God, could rest on the Sabbath, the seventh day, it seems that God was also using the manna as a way to remind the Israelites of who they were and whose they were. Keeping the Sabbath goes back to the very first story in Genesis and appears all throughout the Bible. Keeping the Sabbath is one of the key ways the Israelites are set apart from others and are bonded to their community. The Sabbath is their identity, our identity. As Laura so powerfully preached last Sunday, rest is a gift, a divine gift, essential to who we are as humans and who we are called to be as God's people. Also, in giving all of the Israelites equal access to the manna, God was showing the people that they were equal to one another in dignity and worth. No one got more, no one got less, at least than they needed. And the food was given to them by God as a free gift. It did not need to be earned through hard work or good cheer or any action whatsoever. Another aspect of this story I like is that we are told 4 times in the story that God gave the manna to the people because they complained. And I think this is so important to lift up. It is okay to complain to God, to lift up our hardships, the injustice, and the pain that we both see and experience around us. God does not want us just to silently accept whatever strife we are experiencing, but God is moved in compassion when God's people cry out. God is listening to us right now, day by day. A few different biblical scholars suggest that it is this hearing of and this responding to people's complaints that shows us what is so very different between God and Pharaoh. Pharaoh, who you'll remember, whose oppressive rule the Israelites were escaping by going on their journey. God is one who listens to the cries of the people. Pharaoh does not. Pharaoh did not listen to the Israelites when they were enslaved. If you go back and read the first chapters of Exodus, before they leave their captivity, you will see the number of times it is said that Pharaoh did not listen, did not hear when the people cried out. For us today, I think this can help us discern the divine presence and between the divine presence in our world and the forces of oppression that we face. We can ask the question when we're trying to figure out, is this God, is this not? Does it listen? Does it care? Is it willing to be moved by compassion? Biblical scholar Anthea Porter Young also encourages us to turn that question on ourselves. Are we ones who listen? Are we moved by compassion when we hear of suffering? And do we respond to what we hear by meeting needs that all may one day be fed? Day by day, are we helping others to get through with what they need? It's interesting to note at the beginning of the story that the Israelites romanticized their time in Egypt, even though they were enslaved and their children were killed. And I think that's interesting to consider in this moment. Of course, there are things we may miss about our lives before the pandemic. And certainly some of us have been experiencing this wilderness time so much more harshly than others. But I do wonder, are there ways that some of us might be overlooking the oppression and injustice that was present before? The world of 2019 was far from perfect. Racism was real and deadly. Our planet was tinkering on the brink of the point of no return by way of climate change. And so many faced illness and suffering that was compounded by unequal access to healthcare and employment inequality. I can go on and on. You know what I mean. I don't mean to say that we should not be hopeful about life after the pandemic, but I do mean to say that we should look forward and not back. Day by day, we must be committed to a new world and a new way of relating. We must get through this, not to go back to what was, but to create something better for the future. Perhaps something the world has never known. I found it interesting that God heard the Israelites cry when they asked to go back, but God did not give them what they asked for. They asked to go back, but God gave them manna, which is what they needed to go forward. What do we need to go forward? What wisdom, perhaps, have we already gained from this wilderness time? I can't assume it's the same for all of us, but I do know at the very least, day by day, we have gotten through. And there is so much power and strength in that. Even when we didn't know if we would or if we could, we did. Even when we weren't sure about tomorrow, we got through today. And maybe, I know for me at least, there was manna there to sustain us. Maybe that was manna in the form of unexpected phone calls or messages or cards in the mail. Maybe through a sunrise or birdsong, a sense of God's presence in music or prose. Maybe it was the sight of the first bud of spring on an otherwise barren tree. Or, quite simply, but by no means something to be taken for granted, maybe that manna was just enough food in our fridge and a roof over our head. And maybe, too, we are and have been also purveyors of manna for others. As we have made calls and sewed masks, wrote letters, signed petitions, made donations, the list goes on and on. But day by day, so many of us have done what we can. If you told me last February what we were in for this year, I'm not sure what I would have thought. If I could have fathomed all that was before us and is perhaps before us still. Maybe it's somewhat of a blessing we didn't know. But looking back, I do know that somehow I'm still here. We're still here. Day by day, we're getting through. We're certainly on a journey, but we're on it together. We've had the manna we needed, if not the manna we wanted. We've cried out, and I do believe God has heard us one way or another. God does not ask us to hold in our complaints, even if we might know that some have it so much harder and worse. God's compassion is big enough to hold every tear and comfort every fear, even little old mine. Day by day, we've had enough, and maybe at times even more than enough. Maybe enough to trust and take some true Sabbath rest. But my friends, the journey is not over yet. We are still in the wilderness, but we're in it together. If you look back at Exodus again, one last thing you might notice is as we move into the manna story and the wilderness journey, that the Israelite people began to speak with one voice. It is said they grumble together. And perhaps there is hope in that too. We are being brought together, even though we are scattered and yes, divided at times. But we are one people. We have all come from dust, and to dust we shall return, each and every one of us. We all, at the most basic sense, need manna to get through the day. So, my friends, as we prepare to journey together into this season of Lent, God is with us. Let me say that again. God is with us and with you. Cry out when you need to, and yes, celebrate the manna when it comes. When you've taken what you need, give the rest away, and trust and know that more will come. Day by day, we have gotten through, and we will, by God's grace, continue to do so. We are growing in wisdom about that which truly matters, and we are shedding that which must be left behind, that which is too heavy a burden to carry and which will not serve. We cannot and must not go back to what was. The future beckons us forth, and the promised land of God's reign of justice and equality calls us towards it. There is a better future awaiting us all, and God will be with us at every step. Day by day, we will get through, not by looking too far ahead, but just to the day, just to the next step, just to the next glorious surprise of manna. We are moving forward, and we're doing so together. Thanks be to God. Amen.